Alright, geometry fans, our topic for today, three-dimensional figures. Let's talk about spheres. So let's talk about what happens when you take that ball, that three-dimensional circle. Well, I'm going to go to the formula sheet first. And here's your sphere. And what you'll notice about this is that you only have two formulas for a sphere. There's no lateral area, and the reason is there's no sides to this. There's no bases. So all you have is the surface area, the total area. So if you're going to wrap this thing up, 4 pi r squared. So you'll notice the only variable we have is r. That's going to be the radius of the sphere. So even with a three-dimensional ball, you still have a radius. Volume is 4/3 times pi r cubed. Be very careful, that's r to the third, but surface area is r squared. Alright, so let's do some examples here. Number 1, find the surface area and volume of the sphere if the diameter is 12. So if the diameter is 12, what we need is the radius. So the radius is half that, that'll be 6. So surface area is 4 pi times radius squared. Now in this case the radius is 6. So that's 4 pi times 36. So you can write this as 144 pi if you multiply that, or if we take 144 times pi, we get 452.4. So 452.4. Now this is an area, that would be centimeters squared. That's your surface area. So if we're covering this up, 144 pi. Volume is 4/3 times pi times the radius cubed. So the radius is 6. 4/3 pi times, that'll be 216. Now if we multiply, if we do 4/3 times 216, then what we get is 288. So 288 pi, or if we type the pi in there, we get 904.8. 904.8. Now this is a volume, so this would be centimeters cubed. Volume is cubed, area is squared. Okay, so what you'll find with the sphere, it's a little bit easier than the others because you have really only one variable that you need, it's the radius. Let's do number 2. Find the surface area and the volume of the hemisphere. Now what happens here, this is half of a sphere. That's what a hemisphere is. So the surface area is 4 pi r squared. But in this case, well, let's go ahead and do this. So we'll get 10 for the radius, and that's 100 times 4. So you get 400 pi. But that would be the surface area of the whole thing. Now what we've done is we've cut out half of this. So I'm going to take this and divide by 2. And what that gives us is 200 pi. And now is where I got to be careful. Because when I cut this off, when I cut off this top half, now we have this exposed. This is now part of the surface. We have to count that. So it's not just covering this portion here, which is the 200 pi, but now we have to cover this up as well. Now, the shape, this is a circle. So the area of a circle is pi r squared, which is 10 for the radius. Pi times 10 squared is 100 pi. So the surface area, I'm going to add those. Surface area is 200 pi plus 100 pi, which is 300 pi. And, okay, we don't have the units, but it would be something squared. 300 pi, or, as a decimal, would be 942.5. 300 pi or 942.5. That's your surface area. The volume, so volume is 4/3 pi times the radius cubed. The radius is 10. Now this time I'm just going to get a decimal from this because 4/3 times 10 cubed is going to be a fraction anyway. So let's say 4/3 and then pi and then 10 to the third power. So I'm going to type all that in there. Looks good. 4,188.8. So 4,188.8. Now that would be the volume of the whole thing. We want the volume of the hemisphere, which is half. So I'm going to divide by 2. And our answer for the volume is 2,094.4. 2,094.4. All right, let's take another example here. Let's take number 3. Find the surface area of the solid. So what we have here is a hemisphere. We got half the sphere, and this is a cone right here. Now for the hemisphere, the surface area is 4 pi r squared. And that's going to be 4 times 4. We get 16 pi. Now that's for the whole sphere. So since we only want half, we're going to divide by 2, and we get 8 pi. That's for the hemisphere. So we're going to take that. Now we also need to add the cone. We want that part. Now here's the thing. It says find the surface area. This circle right here is not part of the surface. It's being covered up by the hemisphere and the cone. Where they meet, they're covering this. So we're not going to include the circle. So when we take the hemisphere here, when we took the surface area and we divide it by 2, we do not need to add the area of the base of this circle because it's already covered. We're only covering the outside. So it's the same deal with the cone. You might think I have to use the surface area formula, but this base is already covered. So all we're finding here is the lateral area for the cone. And that's pi times the radius times the slant height. The radius is 2, and the slant height is 5. We already have that, so that's 10 pi. So if you want the total surface area, so the surface area for the figure, we just add those up. 8 pi plus 10 pi, we get 18 pi. Or as a decimal, that would be 56.5. Okay, so that's how you find that. So you have to think about what's being covered and what's not. What do I have to count when I'm doing this? Let's take number 5 and number 6 at the bottom here. If the surface area of a sphere is 36 pi, what is its radius? We're going to work backwards here. They give you the surface area. Surface area is 4 pi r squared. And they actually tell you the outcome is 36 pi. So the question is, how do we solve this for r? Well, we want to move the 4 pi. This is 4 pi times r squared. To undo multiplication, let's divide by 4 pi. And what happens is that on the left side, this reduces to 1 r squared. And on the right side, pi divided by pi is 1. 36 divided by 4 is 9. Now we're not done. We want the radius. So to undo r squared, let's square root both sides. And what we get is the radius equals 3. All right, so we had to work backwards there. Let's do one more. Let's do 6. If the volume of a sphere is 972 pi, what is its surface area? So volume, that's 4/3 pi times the radius cubed equals 972 pi. They're asking for surface area, but we first need to find the radius. So we're actually going to solve this equation. Now what I'm going to do, that 3 in the bottom there, it's 4 divided by 3. I'm going to multiply both sides by 3 to reduce that, to cancel that out. And what that gives us is 4 pi r to the third equals 3 times 972. This is a case where you do not want to do the decimal. Let's keep this in terms of the pi. So that's 2,916 pi. Okay, now 4 pi times r cubed. Let's divide by 4 pi. And what we get is r to the third equals 2,916 divided by 4 is 729. 729. Okay, so to solve this, to undo a cube, we have to take the cube root of both sides. So the cube root of 729, it's not the square root. So the cube root of 729 is 9. Okay, it works out nicely. So the radius is 9. But we're not done. Okay, what are they asking for? The surface area. Well, surface area is 4 pi times the radius squared. Now that we know the radius, that's 9. So it's 4 pi times 81. And if you multiply that, we get 324 pi. That would be the exact answer. Or 1,017.9 would be the decimal. And that is the end of the notes.